All right. Hello, everybody. I am so glad that you can make it to Eradicate TRD, episode number 3. How excited are we? And we are talking about ice and eyes today. And, just to level set where we are and what we're doing. And I don't know about a lot of you, but we just had so many challenges. And a lot of the what we talk about in Eradicate TRD is how our patients get care and how they're delivered care. And I saw this impacting my patients, and I really wanted to have an honest, thoughtful conversation with people I trust about what was happening. And I'm grateful to have some brave humans that are willing and able to talk about how this impacts them and their work. And also, I would like to acknowledge that and also the privilege of being able to have this hard conversation in this moment. And so let's get it going. All right, here we go. So here are our humans. So what eradicate TRD. So we have Cesar Briceño today and Alexis Smith, who's a lawyer, and Lauren Daskivich with us. And so I just wanted to ground us all in kind of our truncated timeline. So, as you know, the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement is an entity that has been around many, many, many years. And so when we're talking about how it is impacting our patients, we're talking about our most recent encounter with this entity. So 2025, there was an executive order that expanded the policies, and there was a push to have some of our neighbors um, removed from the country. And there was increased funding and expanded operations nationwide. And so then in December, there were surges. And actually in Minnesota, you all have been hearing about this. There was, one of the largest enforcement operations in history. January 2026, a lot of this came to light as we all witnessed the murder of Renee Good and other fatal shootings, and there was backlash protests, and we continue to experience that even to this day. And so in the meantime, there have been many responses to this, lawsuits, investigations, and just agents otherwise. And, actually in this moment, they are debating this in Congress, the funding for ICE and reform and what we should do next about that. And so today, in that backdrop, in that context, we are going to talk about our patients. And we're going to talk about our patients and their access to care. And I would say in the scene lab, we are particularly in a good position to talk about this because we do study health disparities and we do study access to care, and we study how our patients get care and what are the barriers to care. And so we've published extensively on social needs. We've published extensively on diabetic retinopathy and lapses in care in diabetic retinopathy. And for a lot of our chronic illnesses in eyes, a delay in care is along the path to blindness. And so I really wanted to have a conversation about what that looks like and what that means. So today we brought our experts to talk about what that means and what we can do. So today we have Dr. Cesar Briceño, who's coming to us from Philadelphia. We have Alexis Smith, who is coming to us right here from New Haven. And then we have Dr. Lauren Daskivich, who is in all the way from Los Angeles. So just a moment here. And I want to just do a really nice intro about our crew. So I wanted to just give you a little backdrop about, Dr. Briceño. He's Assistant Dean, Student Social and Professional Networks, and Associate Professor at Penn, and he volunteers at a predominantly Spanish-speaking clinic. And so we wanted to just have him start and just give an intro into, what brought you here and why how this might be impacting you. And we'll just do a quick intro, get all of the speakers in, and then we'll come back around and do it together.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Kristen. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak today. And it is truly an honor to be here with all of you. So that's first and foremost. I agree that this is a privilege to be able to have this very difficult conversation, and I see it as a duty. So in my work, I primarily deal with reconstructive surgery in an academic setting, but I also volunteer in the region in a clinic that really primarily caters to Spanish-speaking population, and so a population that's been particularly hit hard by the events that you alluded to in your introduction. And so in that role, I really do primarily just comprehensive ophthalmology. I don't do the subspecialty work that I do in the academic center. And so there I see glaucoma, I see diabetic retinopathy, I see myopia, I see everything, cataract and the whole thing. And so this has really been a difficult time for our patients as well as for our volunteers and our staff. The vast majority of us who work in this setting are also identify as Latino or Hispanic. For many of us, Spanish is our first language. Many of us have foreign names. Many of us have foreign faces. And we now have to spend the beginning of every shift really going over a lot of the really kind of best practices for if there's a raid and if people show up. And it's eating into our precious little clinical time. And our patients are really afraid to come see us. And so we'll get into that more, I'm sure, but that has had really a myriad of negative impacts on the way that we can deliver care. And it's very concerning.
We're so happy to have you, and thank you so much for joining the conversation. We also have Alexis Smith, and she's our lawyer for the day. Yay, lawyers! So we're delighted to have her. So she's the executive director of the New Haven Legal Assistance Association, which is a nonprofit that provides high quality legal assistance to individuals and families who cannot obtain a lawyer. And she spends a significant amount of her time doing family law and immigration law. She has a myriad of accolades and awards, among them the Connecticut Bar Association, a Legal Scholars Program. She's earned awards from New Haven Probate Court, from Gateway Community College, Connecticut Magazine's 40 Under 40, Connecticut Law Tribune's list of leaders, and she continues to be a leading voice in our community and for our neighbors that may not be able to do so at that time. She's also, an amazing mom and keeps up with all of that at the same time. So, if you wouldn't mind, Miss Alexa Smith.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you for inviting me to this space. I learned a lot in our prep calls about various medical things that I did not know before meeting you all. So it's really been great. Our organization, which is located right here in New Haven, Connecticut, we're really rooted in the values of access to things like justice and fairness. And I often talk about our history as an organization, and we were founded in 1964, and that wasn't by accident. Right. That was really in the heart of the civil rights movement. That was in the heart of the war on poverty. And so there's a through line between the work that we do and our founding. And I think some of the things that we've seen over, the last year have actually been very much what you talked about at the beginning, Kristen, where, patients who delay their care, that can lead to bad things for them, right? And in our work, our clients who delay coming to us when they have a legal matter oftentimes can lead to more dire circumstances and consequences. So we often like to be able to intervene in a client's legal issue at the beginning, before they receive further notices, before they're unable to get to court, before they're unable to get to that administrative hearing. And so because of the actions of ICE and law enforcement within our community, we've seen more and more people afraid to come to us, afraid to access other points of contact that are important to resolving legal matters. And so it has been, very, very concerning. We do quite a bit of work in our office. We handle housing cases, employment cases, public benefits. So individuals who are receiving federal and state assistance, we want to make sure that they can continue to receive that really important income. And we also do quite a bit of family law and immigration as well, as Kristen mentioned. And so just to give you a little bit of context, there are currently 40,000 cases pending in Hartford Immigration Court. So in our teeny tiny little state, Connecticut, there's 40,000 cases that have yet to be heard. And so it is really concerning because there are not enough lawyers to represent all of those individuals. And we can talk more about some of the work that we do and the different strategies that we have employed over the last several years, but particularly the last year. But what I would say is the partnerships that we have been engaging in are really, really important. And it really is kind of an all hands on deck moment that we're in right now. And there are organizations that we haven't partnered with before. There are ones that are longstanding. There are people who, reach out to me kind of consistently looking for how can I help, which, gives me a lot of hope in this moment.
I love that. And, we'll now hear from Dr. Lauren Daskivich. Dr. Lauren Daskivich was on one of our other webinars talking about the safety net. She's a fan favorite because of the way that she leads at LA County. We're so proud of the work that she does and all the patients that she serves there. And she has a specific lens on how she perceives this particular moment. So she's currently the director of ophthalmic services and eye health programs at the LA County Department of Health Services. And she is an expert in policy and technological innovations, particularly when we think about kind of telehealth and care delivery to vulnerable populations. And so her expertise in operations and also in community really compounds together in how we can think about what comes next in this moment and what we're seeing and what we can do. So Lauren, if you just take a moment just to, ground us in who you are and what you've been experiencing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kristen. And again, thank you for giving us the space to have these very important conversations. I think, listening to my esteemed colleagues here with me today and many that I work with every day, it's been one of the hardest things, I think, is to not be able to advocate in the ways that we want to about all the things that we're seeing. So it's, I think we're all very appreciative of you being brave yourself and allowing us to raise our voices together, which is one of the things that I think gives me some hope, as Alexis said, and it heartens me to be able to have a space and to be able to raise our voices together on behalf of our patients, and to voice our concerns. So I think that's been something that we have had a lot of here in LA County. I mean, we are Los Angeles County Department of Health Services is the second largest safety net in the nation. And so our population is primarily immigrant patients. We are primarily non-English speaking patients. The majority of our patients are non-English speaking, most of those Spanish speaking patients. And this is hitting, very close to home in all of our clinics, spanning not just eye care, but all the care that we deliver. And watching this again hit our patients as a whole, right, impact all of their systems of care has been really devastating, I think, to a lot of our providers. LA County has been very vocal about protecting the care for our patients and ensuring that we, as employees of the county and providers of care, feel safe in doing so. But it's a hard and heavy time. I think one of the most powerful things for me was actually watching, especially in ophthalmology and in eye care and in the safety net. We always have a lot of need. We always have a lot of patients that are in need of care, no matter what's going on in the broader world. It's sort of the nature of the safety net. And in tracking our data, when we noticed, you could see the actual impacts of ICE activities. And when the ICE raids came into Los Angeles in June of last year, and we could see the sharp dip in the volume in our eye clinics in particular, and to see that was accompanied by a rise specifically in their no-show rates. So it was clear that people were scheduled to come and see us. Our clinics were scheduled to be as full as they always are, but those people weren't making it in to see us, and it was largely because of fear. And I think that was a scary thing for all of us. It's also been brought more to home, or even more, I think, the outcomes are coming full circle to us now. It's been a bit so it was June of last year, at least, since the raids really impacted us here in LA, and again brought it to home. And then we've continued to see on that timeline you put up what has happened in the nation, and that has, I think, continued fear in populations all across the U.S. and watching what happens in Minnesota and other places. And now we're starting to see the results of those delays in care that I think we've all spoken about, that are such a scary and formidable thing to think about. But then when you actually start to see them in practice, it's when you start to sort of realize that your fears, your nightmares are coming true. And well, we're starting to see that in our clinics now. Our patients may be showing back up, but they're showing up late. And just this week alone, I saw a patient who was status post corneal transplant and was doing well on their on the steroids, on their suppression therapy, but missed the last visit with us because of ice raids and didn't feel safe enough to come back in until the graft began to reject. And that's when they show up to us. And we're seeing that in kind of all of the specialties across the board. Our eye clinics across all of LA offer, all of the general eye care, but then, all of our subspecialties. And we're really seeing this evidenced in everything. And of course, we see a large amount of diabetic retinopathy, which I know, Kristen, you and I have done a lot of work on and commiserated on, in our mutual desire to eradicate TRD. But sadly, this is one of the things we're seeing: worsening diabetic retinopathy come in, and we've seen a lot more of our PDR, our vitreous hemorrhages, and sadly, TRDs that are now walking through the door, specifically because of delays in care that have happened due to the ice raids, the immigration enforcement actions. So, watching that happen every day can be a really hard thing, but it does, it gives me hope that we have a space to raise the concerns together, and that there are a lot of us that are here and willing to advocate for our patients, not just on a small scale, but on larger scale too. And I do benefit from being in an organization where they've been very clear about the mission and very clear that we are here to provide healthcare for all, regardless of immigration status. And we're going to protect their right to get that care and our right to provide it. So there is hope.
I love this. And speaking of hope, because that's a great place to start, and I think when we have this conversation, it to me evokes a sense of loss, like and a sense of like trepidation. So I really want to start with, hope. What are the things around the systems that you work in that are working better? How are people like, working with the systems, within the systems, outside the systems? Like, what are you all seeing that's helping our patients get what they need? We're just going to start with you, Lauren, because we were with you. Would this be a good time for your slides?
Sure.
Okay, good. All right, let me know.
See them up there. All right, I can see everyone else. All right, great.
Good.
So, and this is just an example, yes, of, like we said, that there are things to do, right? And I think that's one of the things that LA County, for me, has really been, strong and forthright, and a leader in this here, for us in Southern California, in our safety net of really saying, we're going to do our best to help there be care without fear, both on the patient's end and on for the staff. And so these are some of the things that LA County put forth as a way to help us in that effort of providing care without fear. These are some resources for both our immigrant patients and their families. I put up a little screenshot of the flyers that we have to hand out to patients, and then on the left, or at least it's my left, the information on what's within those. Because as an ophthalmologist, I know that reading tiny print isn't always easy. So those screenshots are probably not that easy to see, but this is the information that's within it, that teaching our patients about all the options of the ways that they can get care. Even in the eye clinic, there are ways that we can provide video visits, phone visits, e-visits, and that we are willing to do so. I think that's one of the most important pieces to get across to our patients, is that we are here for them, and that we understand this climate of fear, and they shouldn't just sit at home to be afraid. Please reach out to us. We have clinic specific flyers, because sometimes the phone numbers are different depending on where you're getting that care, and we want our patients to have those resources, so they know where to call, what to ask for. Just reach out to us and tell us what your situation is, and we want to help you be able to get care from a place that feels safe to you. So that can be done, again, video, phone, e-visits, even in eye care. We'll figure out a way. Let us worry about that. But stay with us, stay in touch. And we have a nurse advice line. We also have urgent visits, or an option for urgent visits. So the care isn't, we can continue both routine care and urgent visits through telemedicine. And then our pharmacy offers, we want to remind our patients that our pharmacies offer online phone refills, free delivery. You don't have to leave your home. You don't have to come to us to get care from us, but stay with us. And one of the things I actually thought was awesome, and is not something I had ever had to know about before this happened, are these Know Your Rights, the red cards. And the county, we provide red cards in 20 languages, and actual physical laminated cards that we have available to give to our patients. And we began doing so when ICE activities became a concern. And there are 36 more languages. So it was really impressive that 56 these red cards exist in 56 languages on the website that I provided here for the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. And they have, these red cards that are available to print out. I'll show you an example of that printout, because people can print them at home. We, again, create them and get laminated cards for patients to have, but people can print them themselves just from the website. And we also have, in case people want more information about, what their rights are, there are in-person workshops for Know Your Rights, sponsored by the ILRC, and also a pre-recorded online workshop, which we just make sure our patients have that information. And then, of course, there are additional beyond just what is provided in health services, but through the LA County Office of Immigrant Affairs, there are additional resources. And so we make sure to connect patients who have any desire for that or want to know more about what's out there through the website and the telephone number. And that's, again, here for LA County. And there are, though, on these websites, resources that can be accessed, I think, for folks outside of LA County, too. It's just a really great source of information. Can I change the slides? Okay, great. And then this was an example of the red cards, because I thought it would just be helpful to kind of visualize, like, what do you mean you could, what this looks like at home, and you can print it out. And so the website, I kind of listed here on both sides of it. And I love that it's really accessible to folks in so many different languages. And the instructions, again, are pretty clear, easy to follow. And I realize that, it's the tarjetas rojas, the red cards, in Spanish on the right here, but clearly what's below it is not in Spanish. That's Haitian Creole. Like, it is very impressive, the array of languages they have, and just how accessible they want to be to all immigrant patient populations. And again, things that give us hope, that bring heart. I just love to see, how accommodating, how, the degree of advocacy that these resources, these organizations, and again, this comes from the Immigrant Legal Resource Center that they have out there for folks. So part of, again, I think our job in LA County is to make sure our patients know about what's out there, and they're not isolated, home alone, and feeling like they don't have resources. We really, again, want to avoid the fear and try to enhance care without fear. So the last slide I have actually is from our county SharePoint of resources for our workers. So I think this is helpful to know as well, just an example of what county has done in this, because I think so much of the fear, again, is not knowing, like, what do you do, what's possible, not really being able to see a light at the end of the tunnel, and feeling like you're alone. So the county has been great about making it very accessible to, again, the mission, which you can see written here, which is emphasized around every turn, because it's hard and heavy to provide care, not only to get care in these environments, but to provide care, to show up every day in an environment of fear. So being able to kind of reassure each other, be there for your colleagues, and know that your organizations are there for you and supporting the work you do has been really important. And so this is just a snapshot of our SharePoint and things that we have for our healthcare workers, our health services workers, actually in all kind of branches of the county to access, and an example of the type of FAQs. I think this sort of knowledge is really helpful for people to have when you're in these environments and when you're providing care. As Cesar said, it's hard to go in when you just want to focus on your task at hand, which is hard enough as is. It's hard for people to be sick, and it's hard to take care of people when they're really sick. It's an emotional process as well as one that requires a lot of physical and mental effort on both sides. And now suddenly, our minds are being diverted into this other big scary piece of being afraid for our well-being while doing this, while getting care and while giving care. So having things like FAQs, just so people know, so you're prepared. And I think also it's been helpful for the county that we have it in a place where it is accessible. It's somewhere you can go back to. It's not something, it may help from having to always repeat it, or somebody said, well, we went over it once, but wait, what was that? What happens if that sort of uncertainty of like, I'm not normally in this environment, what do I do? Or this isn't normally what happens to me when I go into work or when I'm coming in to provide care. So these resources are always here for us to go back and to access, and to look through on our own, so that we can get answers to our questions and decrease the uncertainty, because uncertainty also leads into the fear. So that's one of the ways, I think, some of the things that we can do, to try to give ourselves a little bit more secure footing in a time that feels very tumultuous.
That is fantastic. I love having those resources. I love having the documentation available for people to be able to look at them. And then I'll just go to you, Alexis. I know that, talk about some of the things that, have facilitated the work of your organization at this time, some things that you have seen to be helpful from the past, but even like some pivots that you've made that have been really helpful in supporting our immigrant communities as we face challenging times for our neighbors.
Yeah. Lauren, first, I'm so glad to hear about the red cards. Just literally outside my office, I have about 5 boxes that are on top of a file cabinet. So we really try to get the word out about those as well. But they're
We're
really
using them. We're using
yeah,
them. They're great.
They're great. So coast to coast, this is great. So I mean, I think a couple of things. We have been, very concerned about people being able to access court, as I mentioned before. And so one of the things that we have been able to do is offer our space for remote court hearings. So people can make that request, depending upon the nature of the case, and actually be able to just come here, and do your hearing here in a somewhat safe space, where the technology is good and you don't need to worry about that. So you're not missing your court hearing, you're not missing your court date, you're complying, and being able to access the legal system. So that's one thing that we have really tried to do. Another thing, we have always employed a number of different strategies to getting information to people. I mean, we do quite a bit of individual legal representation, but we also do a lot of Know Your Rights presentations, both to existing clients and the client community. We want to make sure people have an understanding of this complicated system, and these complicated forms. And so being able to give information about that to people is really important to us. But also educating providers. And so, school social workers, as an example, is a group that touches so many students and their families. And so being able to give information to a social worker where they can say, this family came in and they keep talking about this issue they're having with their landlord. This family came in and they talked about, this notice they got about Medicaid, and, being able to give them prompts to probe that further and question that further, and possibly being able to refer, a case to us. And I think the other thing that we have seen, is, I feel very fortunate to live in Connecticut. I mean, we have really strong leadership And we have people who have been, part of the resistance to the really harmful policies that we've seen come down from this administration. And that's come in the form of lots of lawsuits. Our attorney general has really been on the front lines, working with a lot of different states, including California, on a number of lawsuits challenging a lot of the executive orders that have come down and a lot of other policies. So that has been really good to see. And I think in addition to that, and kind of similar, is there's been a lot of legislation, I think, really important legislation within the state wanting to address some of the concerns. So, as Kristen put up, one of the very first things that this administration did in terms of kind of overturning the sensitive location policy that we've all just come to accept as for many years. This legislative session for Connecticut, there's a proposed bill to kind of secure that, right? To make sure that health facilities, religious institutions, schools can continue to be sensitive locations. And the importance of that, I think, is so significant. I mean, my background, prior to coming into this role was I was an education attorney. And so I represented kids, many of whom had disabilities or difficulty in school and needed certain services. And the stability that a school can provide for students and their families is just so key. So to know that at least a school can continue to be a safe place and a safe space is really important, to all kids, but particularly the families, the communities that we're, specifically talking about. I think the final thing that I'll say is it's kind of a funny anecdote, but I've been surprised the last several months, in different spaces, whether it's, in the community, at community events, or at school activities for my kids, or other after school activities, and the number of people who have said and preface this by saying, I never thought I'd say this, but thank goodness for the lawyers, right? And I think there's this like recognition that places like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the ACLU or the National Immigrant Law Center and just countless private attorneys and private law firms who have taken cases pro bono or supported some of these nonprofit organizations, the fact that they are using the legal system to really resist so much of these harmful policies that we're seeing has just, I think, been heroic. And those lawyers have worked tirelessly, not always winning, but winning quite a bit, right? And shout out to some of the judges as well who have also been brave, right, as a theme of this conversation, in wanting to challenge some of these things, right? Particularly funding for really important agencies that are providing important health policies, important social policies, all of those things that are really important to all of us. Yeah.
I love that. And, Cesar, with your experiences, can you talk a little bit about those changes and, how that has facilitated some of the work being done?
So, it's interesting because it's inspiring and humbling to be here with all of you because you have such intimate knowledge of the laws and the regulations and the potential resources that are available. Most of us in my academic institution really don't have that knowledge. As physicians, we're not trained to do this. And most of us, unless we interface with this type of clinic or this type of kind of community-facing role, then we don't really get to learn it on the job either. And so I think one of the things that has really come to light for me, which is a double-edged sword because it's both positive and a negative, is that I've learned a lot about this as a result of working in this particular volunteer clinic space. Pennsylvania is not like California or Connecticut. We don't have as much in the way of a safety net or an organized statewide system or even countywide system to ensure that ophthalmic care gets delivered in any kind of consistent way. And so it is highly decentralized and it highly dependent on volunteer work and highly dependent on volunteer work that ultimately really kind of flows back to academic activities. So it's volunteer work that's tied to research. It's volunteer work that's tied to public health initiatives that are, again, tied to research. And a lot of this really goes all the way back to federal funding in order to keep those things alive, and that's under threat currently. And so the to say that the situation is tenuous is an understatement. I mean, really, it's a house of cards that's about to collapse. And so it highlights for me the importance of places like the clinic where I volunteer because it is not just a clinic, right? There is social work available there. There is legal counsel available there. There are community health workers available there in order to educate our patients about the totality of their health as it relates to their social well-being and as it relates to their legal well-being and all those things. And so the reality is that we're spending a lot more time on that right now than we probably did 2 years ago. And it just highlights that A, it was important all along, and B, that we're in a particular moment in time where this really needs to be a focus. The sad part of this, the downside, is that it's a zero-sum game. We only have so much time to spend with our patients. And so if we're spending a higher percentage of that, talking about this, then we're spending a smaller percentage eradicating TRD, right? So it's a trade-off that is necessary right now. And I think that these small clinics, and I happen to know there are many of them because in my role as an assistant dean at the med school, I oversee a lot of student activities, and they are involved in a lot of clinics in the region that do similar type of work for different areas and different populations within our region. And so the fact that it's not centralized makes it harder to replicate the quality and the quantity of education that's being delivered, but at least we're all talking to each other and trying to, in an unofficial way, create something similar to what Dr. Daskivich presented and what Alexis Smith just talked about in terms of having some sort of organized system by which students, or rather patients, can seek help. So is it as good here as it is in Connecticut and California? No, it's not. Um, but I think it's forcing those of us who have agency in this realm to actually act in ways that we haven't before. And that's worth something. So I'm grateful for that. And that is a silver lining.
Yeah, I really agree with that and like having access to that infrastructure and also seeing the spectrum. I think it was so helpful for me just to see, Lauren, that kind of holistic approach of saying, here's what we think is important, here's what you have available to you is buoying for me. And I think, now we're going to turn to, some of the challenges that we faced. I think what you learn when you learn about advocacy, particularly from a provider perspective, is that the stories matter, right? And how we experience our patients and what that requires. And, some of our recent qualitative work that we've been doing talks a lot about our safety nets and the heroic efforts that providers do to plug the holes on an individual level, to plug the holes broadly, as well as we can. And so I think it's really important for us to share that. And so for me, I was telling the team here, it really, started to be in focus last year when I had a patient to ask for a letter from me that he could carry with him as a sort of protection because he had one eye and one eye was blind and one eye was doing okay, stable, but suffering from diabetic retinopathy. And he's like, I really need to stay here to be able to do this. Would you be willing to write me something that I can just hold on to all the time, just in case? And that was the first time that anyone had asked for something like that from me. And, to contextualize that in that personal way really, really stayed with me. And, I talk about this a lot, personally, again, not from the institution I work at or anything else, but I think as someone of African descent, this particular struggle has felt very personal from a profiling perspective. Because as a Black person, I've fit the profile since I can remember. And so has my family members, particularly when you think of men. And so, when we think about that profiling aspect of this was particularly hard hitting for me. And like, how do we know? And what are the signals? And what do we know? What are people telling us about the racism that's underlying or the xenophobia that's underlying the signals of who belongs here? And so for me, it was the welling up of that historically and then anecdotally, individually, that really said, I have to figure out, what my agency is here and what is my role in this moment. So I also appreciate you all for coming along, on that journey. And I wonder if there are any experiences or anything that you all be willing to share about your experience as a provider or your experience in, delivering legal care, that might, offer, some, experiences to share with some of our colleagues that may be listening.
Kristen, I will say that I think one thing that has been very helpful to me, and again, thankful for folks here, kind of seeing just the difficulty of both, of all these things we're talking about, right? Like just the fear, the fear, it's just fear that bubbles up, fear of profiling, fear of it. It's just so much fear, and it's so hard to function in any capacity, much less do big important things when there's fear. And one of the biggest fear counteractors that I have seen is communication. And that's what you're talking about too, of patients sharing their stories of it. It's communication in so many ways, communication that allows us to relate to one another, and also then communication of just understanding what's going on around us. And so, one of the big things actually is part of that, and I didn't mention it before, with our Care Without Fear campaign, if you will, which is my own word for it. But for what the county has done is they began to send emails to all of us that would detail what ICE activities had happened at what locations in the county. And that was important, yes, so that we're aware. But it was also important that it helped with the hearsay. When they're in an environment of fear, it's always like, oh my gosh, were they at this hospital? And, oh my gosh, I heard that ICE came and took 4 patients, or, and so to have some sort of control over that narrative, I think was really important because, so much of what we want to do is make sure that people understand that we are, for lack of a better phrase from COVID, right, to adopt it from COVID, right, that we are all in this together, that there isn't, we're not separating out the xenophobia, and sort of enhancing that xenophobia, enhancing the fear of each other, because these are the sorts of times where we want to build, and we don't want to see destroyed, the relationships that we have had in our communities, both as community members and then also, as providers who build on relationships with community to provide the kind of care that we want everyone to get. We want to keep that sense of community. So communication with our community, I think, is we don't want to lose that in these times. And I think it's helpful for our patients too to know that we are here for them, and that they can have a better understanding of what's going on. And if we have a better understanding of what's going on and who else is out there, and our colleagues, and having spaces like this, again, thank you, to share with each other and to come together and know that advocacy is there as a group, I think is important. One of the hardest things that I have also watched happen, and even in our preparation for this chat we're having today, in reaching out to patients and community leaders and others to hear about their perspectives and be able to present it on this, was to feel their fear of speaking up, and people have being very unwilling to do so. And I am in a place where there is a lot of community engagement, where community is a very important part of care, and that's recognized. We have a very complicated, in a good way, community in the safety net, because we have our own patients who have complicated lives, and again, are immigrants coming from various places and just have a lot of different pressures and issues in the safety net, certainly complicated lives. But also our care network of providers is complicated. We partner with our academic institutions, and there are several large ones in LA that we work with. And these are the colleagues that I sit next to, depending on the facility that I'm in, providing care with all the time. And to hear even from their experiences in working in their projects, and some of it is research, as you said, Cesar, and some folks just do community building work, because we recognize the importance of trust in that community, the community trusting us to provide care for them, just trusting that we are here to work as a unit in the safety net in LA County. And it's been hard to hear again, our community leaders have some fear, and then to also think about these networks, these infrastructure, these relationships with community that have taken so long to build, and to think that this threatens that, right? Seeing people afraid to speak up, afraid to come, and share, and talking to my colleagues that do daily work in the community in various capacities, that, it's been a struggle to balance their day-to-day work with the community needs and demands. And the consequences that we've seen on our end of local ICE kidnappings have really had the ripple effects kind of throughout the work that people are doing, both in healthcare and just in the larger kind of bolstering of community that they do. And it's created the need to pause some of those works and just be very sensitive, right, to what's going on in the community as to whether or not we can continue any of that community building work, which again, I think for me and my experience is very rooted in healthcare and care delivery. But for those around me and this sort of complicated network that I've talked about, where we have, our academic partners and others, there are folks doing all sorts of work, and watching that work, that outreach, having to take a step back for a moment. That's been a difficult thing to worry about, the fracturing of these deep relationships and these deep things that we have built, to create these bridges of trust, for so much, over so much time, to be threatened right now. And so to bring it back to communication, I think, the last thing I want to see is for people to sit siloed, and people to, feel afraid, or feel like, that partner I thought I had on the other side isn't really there anymore, or they believe this and they believe that, or, everyone is, against me, or there's no infrastructure here for me. That's what I think we need to combat. So the fact that your patient felt so comfortable to reach out to you, Kristen, and say, like, can you give this to me? You're here for me in this moment. And I think that's really what our Care Without Fear is about, right? Is that we are here, for all of our patients in any time of need. And this is certainly one of those.
Cesar, I was going to say, yeah, I do have something to add.
I do. I think you brought up so many good points, Dr. Daskivich, and I think to me, they point out something very, very germane to my experience in a smaller, kind of largely volunteer-based uh, clinic. And it's that there are already existing mechanisms by which to target some of these fear responses, like offering televisits, like doing different types of follow-up, like what Alexis mentioned before about providing a safe space, for example, for different teleconferences to happen. The trouble is that still costs a lot of money. And so, the smaller the system, the fewer kind of degrees of freedom you have to pivot. And so we have so few in my particular setting that although we would like to be able to do this, we really can't. And so that is forcing us to be very creative about how to get there. But of course, there's not an immediacy there. There is a certain level of prep that has to happen and then deployment. And then the usual places we would turn to in order to be able to have the capital to deploy such a thing are also now being flooded with way more requests because the federal funds are also not available. So it is creating a more competitive landscape for creating community-facing resources that has really stretched the staff in these types of institutions to kind of the breaking point. And so, I feel like all I'm talking about is bad news, but but the thing is, this is what we think about. This is what we spend time thinking about, and like you mentioned earlier, if we're spending time thinking about that, we're actually spending less time thinking about our patients and how to make them better. And our patients are really the source of information for us. I mean, I've had patients literally say, we're trapped at home, and this is actually in Pennsylvania where there has not been as much activity as there has been in Minnesota or as in Los Angeles, but just understanding that this is what's going on broadly and that this is happening at, courthouses and that this is happening in official, supposedly safe spaces, the fear that ripples away from that really touches everyone. And feeling powerless to really be able to help is tough. this is taxing emotionally. The work that we do is taxing emotionally baseline. We're taking care of people in their most vulnerable moments, and now they're more vulnerable still. And so I think that the toll that it takes on us as the providers can't be also minimized. I mean, I think this is a really hard moment for all of us. And um, I don't know what the solution is, but I think that, trying to work within the degrees of freedom that you do have in your institution, as you have so expertly done in the county over in LA, is an inspiration to the rest of us, and I think also brings to bear the importance of sharing this type of story because there are many things we don't know what we don't know, and so there's just it's really nice to say like I'm walking away from this with all sorts of ideas actually that I want to bring to my next volunteer shift, and so thank you for that. But anyway, I don't know that I have made much of a point in that statement, but I really just wanted to share with you just the feeling of doing the work has become heavier. And that's a shame.
And communication helps us all.
Yes, yeah.
I'm happy our communication helped, and you know where to find me for sure. But I mean, and I will say, COVID, for an organization like ours, the preparatory work of COVID does put us in a better place to build on infrastructures that were there before COVID. I think a lot of us in this space weren't ready for telemedicine in ways that we are now. I mean, bring up telemedicine and or a phone visit and eyeballs, and everyone's like, wait, what? Yeah, what am I going to cover over the phone? But when we were really pressed to think about it, and in COVID, how to keep people safe in a different way, it brought to bear. So it is something that you can learn and build on. And I hope we're not in situations where we need to think about ways of caring for people in environments of fear, but perhaps it's just more ease, and we can think about it in terms of access. So this will help your volunteer communities think about better access.
And I also want to honor that fear too. And, I think in our studies, even before all of this, we do, interviews, qualitative work. We talk about, what keeps people from care. And, it's well documented, and that fear is real, right? And valid, right? It makes complete sense for people in this moment to be afraid to do things, right? And so, it's really about like either offering opportunities to do it scared, right? And then just, to try to figure out what the safest things are. But I think that part is really, really important for everyone, especially in this time. It is not safe, just really isn't. And, trying to manage that. And I also think, we talked about a little bit about the hazard of being between that, right? Being between, your patient and what they have, and real threats from the state about how they can get the care that they need to get is taxing. And I think that part is really important to bring up, and not easy to reconcile. I study social determinants of health and all those other pieces, and we talk about those are also things that come in the way for when someone tries to pursue, care, and like a really deep understanding of what that looks like, and honoring that on our journeys is really an important part too. Alexis, I want to give you a chance to come in here, and I want you to just kind of give us some outlines on what you think, we is available to providers actually. We talked a little bit about it, and I loved, Lauren giving me that kind of lay of the land, like here's some things to do. A lot of our colleagues they may be in private practice, they may, be in solo practice, and they may say, what, I would just like to be able to support, what are like some things that you would say, what, here's some things that you can do that are available to you, right now, for those of us that may be feeling like, look, I don't know, I know this is impacting my patients, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, not underestimating the value of stories from patients and clients is so critical. And I completely understand the kind of time constraints that physicians have, right? Like, totally get it. And I think we face something similar. We have a lot of clients who need our assistance, and we talk all the time about giving clients during our interviews and meetings like their due, right? And I often think about, we've had a project for the last few years focused on housing evictions, and we've collected a lot of data um, on the clients that we've represented, including qualitative data. And one thing that's been a theme that's come up over and over again is clients who, have said, even though I didn't, win my case, so to speak, or I wasn't victorious, the fact that I had someone standing with me who listened and who helped me kind of tell my story was more important than anything. And so I carry that with me as we, think about the people that we work with and the people, who we serve. One thing that we have done is we've partnered with a number of different individuals and organizations who do court accompaniment. So, these are folks who are, possibly going to immigration court and sometimes not, sometimes going to other court. But for folks who are not documented and don't have status, having someone with them who can just either be a friend, be support, but also if something happens, they're there to kind of assist and possibly be a witness to anything that happens. And I know in the health care context, that's a little bit tricky because of confidentiality, but just wondering if there is something, analogous to that. So for folks who are worried about, making sure that they make appointments because of fear, because of leaving the house, if that's something that, is possible. I think it's really important that, everyone kind of be on the same page and understand, what to listen for, I guess is the best way to put it. So, Kristen, when you're talking about those social determinants of health, we see such a parallel sometimes and such an overlap between the housing cases that come through our door and people who are living in really, really horrific conditions that are impacting their health, right? Kids who have asthma and other respiratory issues. It is a pattern, right? During COVID, we saw so many people who came to us at such a late hour because they had been trapped in their homes with abusive partners and spouses, right? And had been victims of really extensive violence, but because court was limited, because they weren't accessing those usual places of employment and dropping kids off at school, there was really nowhere to go. And so I think, having an understanding of, what are those kind of critical things that people say that might prompt something in me to, give reach out to legal aid or have some kind of partnership set up. I think those are all really important opportunities to think about.
I love that. Well, fast forward, we've been talking for almost an hour, and so I will, keep you all for very long. There's just one more topic that I want to cover, and you all don't have to cover it, and then we'll do kind of our final round. And I consider myself a community engaged researcher. The power of communities working together is really unprecedented in so many ways. And we've touched a little bit on it, but I wonder if you all have anything to offer about, how being in community, whether it's with each other or, communities of our patients has impacted this journey for some of our neighbors. And, maybe we can kind of touch on that. And I'll say, I can start in terms of like this particular community, because when I said, oh my gosh, what should we do? And what can I do? It was, one of my Eradicate TRD members who said, don't you have a webinar coming up? And Dr. Sean said, hey, aren't you going to do, don't you have that webinar thing? And I said, huh, well, I could. And so here we are, and the power of like thinking through things together and what's possible allowed at least, this moment. So I wonder if you can think of like any, experiences or opportunities where like communities have allowed things to go forth that hadn't before, otherwise. Yeah.
Um, I, I guess I have some thoughts about that. And I think that this follows a little bit from what we were talking about before, that we, in the ivory tower of academia and in the
Mhm.
world of medicine, we're so used to being the expert in the room that we often don't know what we don't know. And so I have had the privilege, in my career to be one of the first people to talk about, for example, LGBTQ plus issues in the American Academy of Ophthalmology. And, before a lot of the legal challenges that there are currently to the rights of trans people in our country. Even before that, this is, about a decade ago, we were talking, there's already so many barriers that trans people were facing to getting adequate care. And so in ophthalmology, to talk about that was revolutionary at the time, which is crazy to think about. But what I learned from that experience is that simply using that platform to be able to talk about it taught my colleagues so much. And you can see the realization in their faces. I had no idea this was a thing. I just have never spent time thinking about this. And so now I'm going to try harder and I'm going to do better. And I think that there are really numerous ways in which we exercise privilege that we're not even necessarily aware of, and in different spheres that we may not necessarily be aware of, even outside of our offices and outside of our conferences. And so we have power in that as experts, as really revered members of our community, because that's what we still are in this society. Even though that's changed a lot over the years, we still are people that our neighbors look up to. And so using that in order to educate, using that in order to encourage empathy and to really teach people what it's like to have the shoe in the other foot, I think goes a long way to disseminating messages of positivity. And so, in the setting of a small volunteer clinic, with the help of community health workers, with the help of social work, with the help of the lawyers who volunteer there, the few patients who are brave enough to come in and get their care, we can at least make sure that they have something to disseminate back to their communities when they go back. And so I think that there is that opportunity. And even though that opportunity is not infinite, it is sizable. And I think that we can figure out ways to utilize it better. Um, it's going to be iterative and it's not going to happen automatically. But I think if we put intentionality behind it, we'll be doing better and better. And so I think that's what I've learned from my experience in terms of this type of advocacy work. And I see it as a duty, not just a privilege, to use the positions that we have in order to help our patients in every possible way we can. And in this instance, the fight may not directly be in the healthcare front, although secondarily it is. We've been talking about that. And, I'm not a legal expert like Alexis is, but now I know a little bit more, and I'm going to definitely disseminate that. And so I'm grateful for this. And I hope that conversations like this keep happening because it's a virtuous cycle then that actually expands in that direction. And that gives me some hope and some optimism.
And if I can just build on what Cesar said, because all of these things are resonating so much, and actually, or those are the words that I was sticking in my head, and I'll take them, a step different, not further, but a step different in that, advocacy. It's also one of those things where I feel like, as one of those very frustrated providers, that has felt like I am providing care or trying not to provide care in this environment of fear and all the emotional weight and things that Cesar has talked about that comes with that. I think knowing that we can advocate, it's also helpful for us, right? When you're like, what can I do? And so it helps that like heaviness of trying to fight the good fight or put the next foot forward, or when you sort of feel like, the world is more against you and your patients in doing a job that was already hard to start with, right? Why do we have even more burden to bear? It fuels the soul a bit to be able to advocate and to know that there is community even within that advocacy. And so yes, we have, all of our abilities to communicate and to bring back, and I think those pathways go the other way too. If we're going to our community and we're listening to what they need in this time, we also have a pipeline up and out and beyond. that I hope we can continue to use. I know that people are afraid to speak up and afraid to speak out, and our own field is certainly being targeted. Research has been targeted. We all have colleagues, if not ourselves, whose work has been in jeopardy from the change in the federal government's priorities and views of what we do. But I think we still do, as you've said, Cesar, we still have a position to be able to stand by what we think is right and to help magnify the voice of those that we work for and work with. And so listening to what is coming from the community too, and both amplifying that upwards and really being able to fight and advocate and continue to fight and advocate and not have that be tamped down. And to do that, I think for me, certainly it's fighting together, right? The ability to raise our voices together is so meaningful to me. And that, I think, Kristen, that was part of one of our conversations in that Eradicate TRD meeting is, what can we do to not have this feel so heavy and so awful? And it is to be able to, to speak together and to, to join and try to strengthen what we do have, and that community that we have both in our patients and also in each other, and like you said, beyond, I mean, in our legal colleagues, it's not just our medicine colleagues, this is all the folks that are really trying to do the right thing here and fight this fight together. It's good. No one wants to be alone. Our patients don't want to be alone and left feeling like they're fighting for care, or fighting to take care of themselves without help. And I think also as those that are on those front lines ourselves, we want to do this as a group. And the fact that we can, I think, gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I mean, I love that line of lifting our voices together. I mean, I think that's really where it's at. And I think it is humbling for it has been humbling for me, and I think for many lawyers to do what you're talking about in listening to the community, right? Listening to what the community, not only what the needs are, but like their perspective on how we address those needs, right? I think that's that's a level of deep listening that is a practice, right? And really, you need to get used to that. I mean, I think a couple of examples that I would give about how I've seen community really come together the last several months. We have been working on a specific clinic for folks who are within the immigrant community, where they can put together documents in the event that they are deported. These documents basically dictate kind of what will happen to their children. And it's a probate court process. And, we have had a number of different partners that we have had to engage to make these clinics the success that they have been, right? And so it's been local schools in New Haven that have provided space for us to use. It's local churches. It's private attorneys who have volunteered at the clinics. It's law students. It's, people who have a language background who can, interpret for us and interpret for clients. And so to see all of these people kind of come together from different sectors to provide a service to clients who really need it in this moment, I think has been one of those examples, right? Heavy work, really, really heavy work. But it has been one of those moments, I think, that I don't know if I've seen necessarily since COVID, since George Floyd's murder, right? In that kind of moment, right? And so here we are again, kind of seeing how people can come together. I think I've also seen it a little bit in philanthropy, and I know we've talked a little bit about the funding losses, particularly on the federal side. And I think there have been some conversations in the philanthropic community about, what do we do? And so in Connecticut, we actually have a coalition of funders who did provide some pretty significant support for this work, right? And have been trying to partially fill some of the funding gaps, but also recognizing the moment that we're in and the responsiveness that the philanthropic community can have. And so I think those those two are ones that come to mind.
I love that. So we've come to the end of episode
Kristen,
3.
I'm gonna change what I said before, just after
Oh,
hearing everyone. I was like, you know what I really meant? I didn't mean a
yeah.
step different. I meant a step alongside, because I think that's been
Oh,
the
love
important piece.
it.
It's all about the working together. What you
Yay,
just
look
said,
at
Alexis, I was
this.
like, and philanthropy, and like,
Yes, we need to.
see,
Yes.
yes,
Oh,
we're
yes, we
all in
need
this
all of
together.
that.
We're a team from
We
all sides, and it
do.
was just so
We
heartening to
do.
hear. So yes,
Yeah,
we're
so good. I mean, I
along.
think, yeah, we didn't even talk about that piece. I don't know. Let's have final thoughts. So for me, I, heard, educating the providers and like understanding the rights so we can be able to disseminate that to our patients. But then also the other way around, in the science of community engagement, we always talk about the bidirectional pathways and right, building those community-led opportunities where we can hear and do with whatever resources that we have, operating at the apex of our capabilities, and community doing the same with their lived experiences. So I heard a lot about that and how to amplify community voices. And I think also with that, my favorite quote is probably deep listening is a practice. And, I really heard from you all about the humility of, having this position as an executive director, as a doctor, and all those things, and then being able to honor experience, lived experience, and the humans around us and trying to get through something together. So I would like to just offer you all maybe a final, 30 seconds in this moment to be able to say, your what you think. But before we do that, I want to do this first because I want those to be the final thoughts. So I want to go back here. Can y'all see that? Good. All right, cool. I'm gonna go back here
Yes.
because this is the scene lab. So you guys are going on the YouTube. This is where all our other videos sit. So I want you to know that. And then I also want you to be able to support the work that Alexis is doing. So remember what she said. There are 40,000 cases. That number stuck to me. So speaking of philanthropy, get your QR code ready and support some of the work that she is doing. So I wanted to be able to put this, here as we kind of think about how to do what we are doing going forward. And then this is our lab. So grateful for the work that we do here as well. Okay, now you had time to think. So give me your like 30 seconds of the end.
Well, I'll start because I think I probably only gave you my 15 when I interrupted you before.
I'll
Yeah,
take it. You can interrupt me anytime, Dr. Daskivich.
that probably I pretty should probably should have saved that for my final thought. Again, because I feel like I this really has been brought me back to the from thinking that it would have been anything other than a group or team effort. I think that's um that's where the inspiration comes in. So the words that I'm like leaving here with are it's almost, the words on your last slide: support, community, communication. Like these are the things that I think that we can continue to get throughout the journey. We can all learn from each other. And that's some of what has been inspiring for me today. And I know I've given you all a ton of thoughts already on the topics, but ending for me with that idea of really, taking steps alongside, that, it's, if we're fighting this, we're fighting it together. And that's, our patients are with us, our colleagues are with us, and it's when we're not alone in the struggle. So I think, and continuing to have spaces like this where we reach out to each other, we communicate, and we can continue to spread the knowledge and the love and the support, which we all need right now. That's critical for me. So in my final, want to say thank you again to you, Kristen, for giving us the space to do it. And for y'all, for Cesar, Alexis, for sharing with me today, all of the things that you've experienced and learned, because it gives me hope and helps me continue to fight on. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the my final thought is that there are just there's so many ways to be involved in this walk together. As we're moving alongside each other. I mean, I am just I was so moved by, I mean, who knew a group of moms in Chicago and Charlotte during those ICE raids and the ICE essentially invasion of those cities got together and said, you know what, we want to make sure that all kids can get to school. And so if that means we've got to, walk a little extra to get these kids on the school bus and figure out some kind of, phone tree on Signal or WhatsApp or however they did it to make sure that their families know they got to school. I mean, those are the moments of organizing that we need. And those are the moments of volunteerism, that we need. And so whether it's volunteering at, established clinics, whether it's, taking the time to, sit on webinars like this. I mean, I think the amount of learning that people can do, I mean, that is what prompts interest. That's what prompts, more action, more movement. And so I think it's everything. It's keeping people aware. Um, I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and it was about actually a mail carrier in Minneapolis. And he talked about continuing to having to do his job during the ICE raids there, the ICE occupation there, because the post office has that old saying of neither rain nor sleet nor snow, whatever, and how difficult it was for him to continue doing that, but how important his job was because there were people who he delivered mail to that were expecting passports, that really needed passports. And there were kids that he interacted with on a regular basis who were out playing in the yard who had essentially disappeared and were not playing in the yard anymore, right? And so, like, telling that story and making people aware of these just everyday life activities that people have been impacted by because they're not able to do them anymore is just so important, right? And so I think it's the listening, it's the learning, it's taking action, it's all of it. So
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Kristen. I think, first of all, final thought, gratitude, for this and hopefully for the audience that it'll reach and that hopefully it'll be as enlightening for them as it has been for me. I also feel empowered. I mean, I've learned a lot from you in particular, Alexis, and also from you, Lauren, about what I can do better in my role. We don't have a single system, but we can certainly trade notes and we can certainly do better by organizing more proactively. And so I think I will take this back and investigate what's available and try to improve on it. I mean, the reality is that even if you're making a marginal improvement, that's still an improvement. And if, multiple people are doing that simultaneously or in sequence, then all of a sudden things can get a lot better. I don't want to diminish the gravity of the situation we're facing. Obviously, it's really, really scary. And, sometimes it feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but at the same time, we can't just lay down and take it. So, we have to do something. And so, I thank my patients who still keep showing up, despite everything. And I guess I just feel like called to do better by them. So that I am grateful for to all of you. So thank you.
Thank you all so